G'day. So, first off, to any Victorians viewing this video, happy Freedom Day. It's finally a light at the end of the tunnel. Congratulations to all of us. We thoroughly deserve it. So, what I wanted to talk about today, there's not a whole lot going on in terms of national politics, so I thought I'd go to something a bit more fundamental and talk about the Australian Republic, what it is, why we should want it. Full disclaimer, I am a paid up member of the Australian Republican movement, so this is a very biased video today, a very biased take on the Australian Republic. So I guess I'll just go through the website a little bit, go through some of the key points. Hopefully, I'm very hopeful, in fact, that the Australian Republic movement website is decent enough that I shouldn't have to go off of it too much to get the answers we're after. One sec here. So I guess, at the start they're talking about why should Australia become a republic. I actually want to start somewhere else. What is a republic? What even is that? What are we now? At the moment, Australia is best described as a constitutional monarchy, which effectively means that the monarch is the head of the state and there's a constitution in place that limits the powers of that monarch. It also grants powers to the parliament to pass laws, but fundamentally and very importantly, all authority of the parliament is actually derived from the monarch. So, in terms of a principled argument, you would say that the concept of a constitutional monarchy puts the monarch at the head. Maybe some later thinkers would argue that the power of the monarch actually is derived from the people, and therefore all power is derived from the people. But I don't subscribe to that view. If you compare that with a full-blown republic or a democracy, they are different things, but let's, for the sake of argument, say they are the same thing. A republic or democracy is entirely derived from the people. There is no monarch. If there is a constitution, it's primarily to limit the powers of the parliament, not to grant authority to it. And in general, the people are the top of the tree. So let's see what the Republican movement has to say about it. Power is completely in the hands of the people, and an Australian republic would make our system fully democratic and fully Australian. Blah, 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 blah. So, the gist of what I was just saying. I think the primary reason why we should want a republic is that Australians deserve the right to an Australian ruler, right? In my humble opinion, Australians deserve their own rights. They deserve to rule their own country, elect their own head of state, and the idea that everything else in a democracy is selected on merit, through elections, by appointments, and yet we leave the one job, the most important job, in theory, the top job, we leave that one to hereditary rule, doesn't mesh with my vision of what Australia should be. So if we go through why Australia should become a republic, I'm sure the Australian Republican movement is fairly in line with that. The head of the state is currently the Queen, and it should be an Australian, correct? Anyone who holds public office in Australia should be an Australian citizen with allegiance to Australia. So, interestingly, if you want to be, for example, a member of parliament, you are not allowed to be a dual citizen. Famously, a couple of years ago, there was some dual citizen dramas. Dual citizen Australia Parliament, where several senators and members of parliament under Section 44 of the Constitution lost their seats because they were under the acknowledgement of allegiance, obedience, or adherence to a foreign power, or as the subject or citizen, blah, 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 of a foreign power. So we don't even allow our MPs, our senators, to be dual citizens, let alone not even citizens of our country. In fact, the Queen, or the British monarch, is the only person in the country holding any position of power, any position of government power, that is, who is not Australian. On to point two, having an Australian as the head of Australia would ensure the things that our nation stand for: fairness, equality, and merit at the top of the system of government. So again, I think part of the main arguments in favour of an Australian republic are not in many cases practical, they're more on principle. The idea that we live in a country where the head of state is chosen by birth rather than selected on merit does not mesh with how we want our country to run. I really, it's really as simple as that. I mean, the head of Australia should be chosen by Australians. Again, I couldn't agree more with that. If you want to vote for a member of parliament or a senator, you have to be an Australian citizen. Those members and senators have to be Australian citizens. It makes sense to me too that the head of state should also be an Australian citizen. And I think this final point here, Australia should be fully independent. It's not right for Australia's democracy to be subject to a foreign monarch. Sums it up for me. We saw recently with the release of the Sir John Kerr letters to the Queen that although the Queen may not have personally involved herself or personally allowed or denied Sir John to sack Gough Whitlam, the idea that our head of state's representative, or the idea that our de facto head of state should have to write to a foreign power for clarification about the rules, regulations, and procedures of the Australian constitution, frankly, is not up to scratch. It doesn't mesh with what we should be wanting for a republic, for our country. I think that a lot of the things the ARM has listed here are like quite specific points, so I won't necessarily go through them all. Something that apparently comes up in the research a lot: percentage of people who know the head of state of Australia. Something I've heard from the movement is that most Australians don't know their head of state. Apparently, most that the Prime Minister, in this case, at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, is the head of state. I don't know what they think the Queen does. Here we go. Who is Australia's current head of state? So 34% rightly selected the Queen, which leaves, you know, a good chunk, a good majority, 60 odd percent of the rest of the country either doesn't know, thinks it's the Governor General or the Prime Minister who is actually a head of state, which frankly blows my mind. I'm not sure how people get to that point. I understand, like, I don't know what they think the Queen does then. And this isn't an attack on those people who are not sure how their democracy is run. I think it's much more a reflection of the democracy itself, and that we don't actually educate people about how our system works. I think a big problem that the Australian Republican movement faces is that people don't understand their own political system and therefore are very reluctant to change it. So as it rightly points out here, the Governor General is merely the representative of the Queen in Australia, and therefore all authority of the Governor General is derived from the Queen. It's a downstream from there. Not one of Australia's heads of state has lived in Australia or been an Australian citizen. Excuse me. The idea of a president, I think, also really scares people, particularly in the age of Donald Trump. People look at that and think, why on earth would we possibly want anything to do with that? I'm actually opposed to the concept of a separate head of state. I think that the Prime Minister should simply absorb those responsibilities, and we can build in measures into the Constitution to resolve any gridlocks in Parliament, much in the same way a Governor General would do now. The one time where a Governor General has actually had to exercise their authority and against the advice of the Prime Minister, we ended up in a constitutional crisis. No one knew what was actually allowed versus what actually happened. If you want more information on that, you can look up Gough Whitlam, the dismissal, and that'll go into all of that for you. But the point being is our current system doesn't work anyway. So I'm not sure why we should stick to it. So a lot of people within the movement, and I think outside of the movement as well, simply want the Governor General to pretty much stay the same, pretty much maintain everything as it is, and we'll simply move executive authority away from the Queen and into the Governor General's lap. There's a lot of problems with that. Don't need to necessarily go into all of them, but a lot of the Governor General's powers are undefined. The Governor General is, for example, technically allowed to rule by executive order. Now, of course, that doesn't happen. There's a bunch of reasons why that doesn't happen. But I feel like if we're going to go through the massive changes of rewriting our democracy, it's worth actually ironing out these problems before they become problems down the track. Uh, so, yeah, as I was saying, the concept of a president is very scary for people. I think that the idea of an American president who has, for example, veto authority, who can issue executive orders, rule by executive order, who acts as like a, who acts as some sort of counterbalance against Congress and things like that. I don't think that's what actually people want in Australia. I think that the idea of an Australian president would be much the same as what the Governor General is now. It's a largely ceremonial role, largely someone who is outside of Parliament, outside of the political or the daily political struggles. Whether or not you want that president to be elected in a general election, I think that, America does that obviously, but I think that Ireland has a presidential election. Yeah, that's right. So the Irish president is elected. Lots of people, I don't know how true this is or not, lots of people tell me that the Irish president is actually largely apolitical. They're largely outside of the party structures. I don't see exactly how that would work in Australia. I kind of tend to believe that if there was a presidential election, it would largely fall along party lines in the sense that Labor Party would probably, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not nominate, but kind of put their weight behind one candidate. The Liberal Party would probably do another candidate, maybe have some minor parties and other independents put their weight behind other people. But I think it would largely be a political affair, which is why I'm very reluctant to invest any powers in that president. Uh, if kind of in my best case scenario, like I said, we wouldn't have one. But if we are going to have one, I want them to be as kind of powerless as possible to do anything. Um, so I think most people generally believe that the perceived role of the Governor General is a kind of ceremonial person that meets the prime ministers and visiting parties and cuts ribbons at libraries and things like that. That's what I have in mind for a president, if we were to have one. And I think, yeah, the movement echoes that sort of thing here. A person who's above politics. Again, I'm not sure how much I buy into that idea. But having said that, would I take an imperfect republic or maintain the status quo? I would take an imperfect republic every day of the week. Every day of the week. So, how do we change to a republic? This is actually a very important question. Uh, Most people that I know, myself included, were actually too young to remember the last time that we tried to change to a republic, but it does have to be done through a referendum, which means a double majority people in a majority of states. Australia's history with referendums is not a good one. Referendum history. I think only like 10% of referendums ever actually pass. Blah, blah, blah. Here we go. So you can see here, uh, vast majority of referendums fail, the establishment of a republic being one of them. Despite having, pretty close to half support, not one single state actually flipped for the republic. A very good predictor of if a referendum will pass is, first off, it requires bipartisan support. I don't think there's been a single referendum where there has not a single successful referendum where there hasn't been bipartisan support. Some plebiscites here as well. Interesting here, minority of voters, but majority of states. That's an interesting one. Wonder if there's any here where it's majority of states passed, but minority of people did not. Doesn't look like it. 3-3. 3-3. And of course, the territories, no one cares about them. They don't get a say. But if we take a sorry to divert here. If we take a quick look here, so we've got the ones that have succeeded, retirement of judges. So I think they were brought in a mandatory retirement age. Referendums, I don't know what that is. The Australian referendum on referendums. Senate casual vacancies. Like, primarily, they are like procedural problems to allow electors in the Australian territories. Okay, so people in the territories can vote, but they do not count towards a state total. That's interesting. I didn't actually know that. I thought the people in the territories didn't count. I wonder what they count towards, just the total. And I guess they're not included in those lists. But yeah, look, a lot of them fail. As you can see, particularly recently, parliamentary terms, fair elections, local government, blah, 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 blah. And there's even more that haven't even got off the ground because they don't have the prospect of even passing. Close off some of these tabs. So yeah, it would require a double majority. As you've seen, it's almost impossible to make that happen, which really requires the movement to have a lot of ground root or grassroots support to actually even get off the ground here. Something that I personally am a big believer in is the idea of like a champagne Republican. If we look at the Australian Republican Republican movement 1999. I want to see some pictures. There's a young Malcolm Turnbull. He actually aged better, I think. There's a young Tony Abbott as well. Another bloke that doesn't like the Republic. Yeah, lots of pictures of Malcolm Turnbull. So Malcolm Turnbull was, of course, the head of the Australian Republican movement. No, that's... Anyway, look, some of the people involved were like Alexander Downer, Malcolm Turnbull. Here we go. Ian Chappell, like film director, former cricket captain, lawyer, novelist. You know, it's currently headed by a journalist and an author. I think if you saw a picture of the kind of main the what do we call them, the core cadre of the Australian Republican movement, I would be shocked to find a single person there that wasn't a white male of kind of 40 plus years. There is no ground roots or grassroots support for this movement, and it's going to be really imperative for the movement to change that if they actually want to pass this thing in future. I think it's interesting as well that kind of new citizens to the country, so people who have taken the citizenship oath and whatnot, they have no natural allegiance to the Queen, to the monarchy, in the same way that perhaps we're back. I was just saying that the so new citizens to this country who are not of like the kind of European or British stock don't have the natural allegiance to the monarchy that perhaps some of those, like I said, European descended Australians do. And so it seems very strange to me that there hasn't been more of an outreach program into those kind of migrant communities. Let's take a look. The Queen doesn't contribute to our stability, blah, blah, blah. Look. Yeah, like the idea that the Queen provides this stability. I mean, like, isn't Saudi Arabia pretty stable? Am I wrong about that? And, you know, calling like the United States stable, yeah, mostly. I mean, depends kind of when and where, I guess. India is stable. I mean, yikes, man. Aren't they like semi at war with China at the moment? Isn't there like ongoing political strife in the Kashmir region with their neighbor Pakistan? Like, island stable, a nation born from, bombed out cars, and ooh, yikes on that one. Yikes on that one. But look, I get the point they're making, which is that just by virtue of having a queen doesn't necessitate stability. So I think most Australians alive today were probably born after Queen Elizabeth has taken the throne, and therefore have known nothing but stability with the monarchy and with the crown. The point being that that is not always the case, of course. Um, and I think when we look to the future generations of kingship or queenship, we look at Charles and William and whoever's after that. And is there going to be that next Queen Elizabeth among those ranks? Impossible to know. Absolutely impossible to know, of course. The nature of hereditary kind of appointments. I think a big issue that the movement rightly picks up is that people think that changing to a republic needs to kind of suck up all of our energy. We can only address one thing at a time. And of course, that is not the case. Talking about a republic is, like I said, it's a foundational belief that you can hold, but you can also believe that we need to do something about the COVID lockdowns. We need to do something about border closures. We need to do something about X, Y, and Z. None of these things are it's not a zero sum game here. Uh, and I guess kind of addressing this problem, in theory, in principle, should make it easier to address these problems. And the reason why is that I hope and believe that if Australia was really united behind something as massive, as fundamental as changing to a republic after so many years, 200 odd years of being under the monarchy, I suppose it's only been 100 odd years, hasn't it? Of being under the British monarchy, it would really unify the country in a way that we probably haven't seen before. It would really signal the next step away from kind of federation of the colonies into a semi-quasi-independent Australia moving into the 60s and 70s, and then finally the passing of things like the Australian Act, which meant that Australian legislation was no longer sent upstairs to the Brits and into a full independence, I think, which is very important for this country. And I think also very important for dealing with the lasting legacy of the displacement and genocide of Indigenous peoples within this country as well. I think it's very hard to address that when the ruler of the country is not someone who has ever involved themselves in such things, if we can say that. What about the royal family? Yeah, look, lots of Republic supporters do respect the Queen. I have great respect. I have respect for Queen Elizabeth II. I think she's done a very good job considering her role in life. Again, I'm not sure if we can say that about the next one. It's impossible to know. It really is. Yeah. Do we even need someone to be head of Australia? Like, yes, there is someone known as the head of state. I, again, think it should be the Prime Minister. Constitutional support. So the movement, I think, has done... I think they've deliberately not made statements about the constitutionality of First Peoples and whether there should be preambles, things like that. I think they even say it up here. They are a single issue organisation. There's really no room within this organisation to be looking at other problems. So yeah, look, in general, in principle, that's probably uh, the basic outline of why I think we should become a republic. I'd be interested to know, those of you watching this video later on, what you have to say about that. I think for now I'll leave it there, and as things pop up in future, I'll address them. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.